Arnold Brobs, we're back with the Golem Remembered. 1909 to 1980, Variations of a Jewish Legend by Arnold Goldsmith. We are in chapter 3, I believe. Yes, chapter 3. And if I'm honest, I'm not really following the book that too well. A lot to take in here. But we're talking about Rosenberg's and Bloch's books on the Golem. Rosenberg's and Bloch's tales compared. When Joachim Neugroschel spoke of the one-dimensional pop quality and intrusive journalese of Yudl Rosenberg's book, he could have also mentioned other flaws which become more noticeable when Rosenberg's and Bloch's versions of the same stories are compared. To Rosenberg's credit, of course, and his greater success in unifying his collection of tales and sticking more closely to his title character. However, Bloch is the more sophisticated storyteller. A representative story which reveals interesting differences between the two writers is The Wondrous Tale of the Healer's Daughter by Rosenberg, and Bloch's version, The Renegade. Characteristically, Bloch changes much of the indirect discourse in Rosenberg's story to direct quotation. This way he reduces the amount of explication and narration and makes the scene more dramatic. A good example is Bloch's dialogue between the Jewish apostate Dinah and the cardinal. How do you know? The cardinal spoke the words with sharp, penetrating look. That the Jews slaughter a Christian. Rosenberg's narration is flat. At the baptism, the cardinal did ask the expected question, and the girl answered just as the priest had instructed her. Another example is Rosenberg's summary of the content of the false letter supposedly written by the employer who wants Dinah to come back to work for him versus Bloch's version, which supplies the exact letter in quotation marks. Bloch's method is more immediate as well as more dramatic. Less effective is Bloch's sentimental indulgence in the pathetic fallacy when he adds, "The day of the trial was a cloudy one," as if nature wished to show that it felt pity for the Jewish community in its time of trouble. Rosenberg avoids this kind of romantic sentimentality, but in all fairness to Bloch, it should be pointed out that he does not use it very often. As Father Thaddeus arrives at the trial of Rabbi Lowe and the other Jews accused of the blood libel, there is a striking difference in the details in each version. Rosenberg simply reports that Father Thaddeus and the convert arrived in a closed carriage. Bloch enhances the drama by adding the crowd's reaction to the sight of one of their heroes. As Thaddeus, accompanied by the state witness, rode up, he was hailed by the populace with strong acclamations. Thus, the hostile atmosphere bodes poorly for the Jewish defendants. Rosenberg continues his restrained report. Next, Rabbi Leva drove up, accompanied by Mordecai Mazel, a leader of the Jewish community in Prague. While Bloch fleshes out the scene dramatically, a few minutes later, Rabbi Lowe, accompanied by Mordecai Mazel, the president of the community, appeared. They were received with catcalls and whistling and cries of "Christ killers." It was only thanks to the precautions of the authorities that they were not trampled underfoot by the mob. When Rosenberg adds a ludicrous description of the presiding judge kissing Rabbi Leva and thanking him for his energetic labor and great wisdom, which had prevented the judge from falsely convicting pure souls, Bloch simply states that Rabbi Lowe related what steps he had taken to clear the matter up, and his report was received by the populace and the judges with the greatest attention. Finally, Rosenberg ends his story with a statement comparing Thaddeus with Haman, the well-known anti-Semite, adding that all Prague rejoiced in Rabbi Leva's victory, as did Esther's city of Shushan. Bloch ignores this colorful allusion to Jewish history and simply brings down his curtain with the Jews of Prague celebrated Shavuot, which came 3 days after the trial, with an enthusiasm they had never felt before. Caught in his own net, Bloch's version of Rosenberg's very wondrous tale about blood libel, which spelled final defeat for Father Thaddeus, has more swiftly moving action and better special effects. Bloch effectively creates an eerie atmosphere with the silence of the city at midnight. As Rabbi Lowe, the beadle, and Joseph head quietly for the black and neglected ruins of the five-sided palace, a rainy damp blew in their faces. A rainy damp? That's hardly good. The Gothic effect is reinforced by lines not found in Rosenberg's tale, such as the pillars of the court in the endless row, as they emerged from the darkness in the light of the torches, and again disappeared, aroused weird feelings. With their burning Havdalah candles, the three men enter the building, with its doorless and windowless openings. The roof also had partly collapsed, so that the cloud-covered sky looked down into the dreary ruins. When the intruders step aside, Rosenberg simply writes that, at once, a wind arose and dust whirled about, and they heard the barking of dogs as the wind tried to blow out the candles. Bloch's description of the same moment is more suspenseful and exciting. As the three men entered the dilapidated building, the odor of the tomb permeated the place, and a plaintive whining was audible. The rabbi listened and caught the sound distinctly. It sounded now like the whimpering of a child, now the whining of a dog. Now it would rise in volume until it finally resembled the roaring of a lion. Later in the same story, Rosenberg's description of the servant's discovery of the body of his missing child in Father Thaddeus's wine cellar is much too matter-of-fact. The lackey realized something was wrong, and he hunted carefully until he came upon the dead child, who he recognized at once. Bloch's description of this macabre scene, though also brief, is much more dramatic and fulfills the reader's expectations of the father's horrified reaction, which Rosenberg strangely omits. While Waclaw was taking inventory of the priest's wine, he came upon the corpse of a child. Upon examining it, pardon, my nose is running, he was horror-stricken and almost swooned, for he recognized his missing child. Rosenberg informs his reader in the denouement that the priest was arrested at once and he was tried and banished forever. Bloch's more specific and moralistic version reads, the monk was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment and was unfrocked as one unworthy to continue his sacred office. To this, Bloch adds a characteristically personal aside, may a similar fate overtake all thine enemies, O Lord. The endings of these two versions of the same story also differ in a way that illustrates Bloch's superior artistry. Bloch's simple one-sentence paragraph ends on just the right note of light-hearted commentary. Who had cleaned out from the Funfer Palace the comets which might have soured the lives of the Jews of Prague? Only Rabbi Lowe and his confidants knew. Rosenberg is much more heavy-handed and cumbersome in his attempt at erudition. In regard to these events, Rabbi Leva repeated the Hebrew. He wanted to protect the worthy woman, by which he meant that God wanted to protect the holy Shekinah, the divine emanation, and her children as well, the Jews, and the holy Shekinah had sent the word 5 to his lips so that he would know enough to search the five-sided palace. I see nothing wrong with his whatever it was finish. The differences between Rosenberg's and Bloch's portraits of the Golem seem to be slight. In both works, the Golem is presented basically as an unfeeling simpleton, a powerful robot whose only function is to carry out the commands of his creator. As the conclusion of how Rabbi Leva created the Golem, Rosenberg describes the homunculus as always sitting in the corner of the rabbi's courtroom, with his hands folded behind his head, just like a golem, who thinks about nothing at all, and so people started calling him Joseph the Golem, and a few nicknamed him Joseph the Mute. Bloch adds a similar touch to this picture of the uncomplicated automaton when, in the Golem, as fisherman, he explains how the Golem was told to come home soon. But as to the meaning of the word soon, he had not the slightest idea. In both works, this simpleton, dressed in the humble clothes of the beetle, is capable of great strength. Rosenberg emphasizes this point more explicitly than Bloch. For example, in the tale of the Torah that fell to the ground, Rabbi Leva sends Joseph with a note asking the sinner and his congregation to come to him immediately. Rosenberg then adds, and when Joseph the Golem went for someone, that person knew he had to come. For if not, it had only often happened that Joseph the Golem would take the unwilling man and throw him over his back like a sheep, and then carry him back to the rabbi through the streets. In Bloch's attack on the Golem, Joseph carries the porter like a slaughtered little lamb through the city to Rabbi Lowe's house. In the earlier version, Rosenberg not only says that Joseph carries him through the streets like a sheep, but adds, the porter was no weakling. Everyone was afraid of him, but there was nothing he could do against Joseph the Golem. On the occasion when Joseph is attacked and pushed him into the well, Bloch writes, it was a freezing cold night. If the Golem had been an ordinary human being, he would have met death instantly, but to him it did not mean much. He dived several times in the ice-cold water and attempted to climb up on the walls. As long as this superhuman strength is put to good use under the control of the rabbi, all goes well. There is only the barest hint in Rosenberg that it can run amok. This is seen in the story mentioned above, when Rabbi Leva has a few strong men administer a lashing to the porter as his punishment for violating the rabbi's edict. In Rosenberg's version, the men carry out the lashing at the rabbi's command, and Joseph the Golem went to work with a vengeance, like a slaughterer with a bowl. The words hint more at cruelty and brutality than at anger. But what is only an undercurrent in Rosenberg's tale comes to the surface in that of Bloch, who gives the Golem a whole new dimension, whereas Rosenberg simply states that the Golem cannot speak. Bloch, in the making of the Golem, adds, and that was really an advantage. God knows what could have happened if a Golem had been given the faculty of speech also. Bloch's Golem is capable of flaring anger and goes somewhat wild in the scenes involving fishing in the Moldau and picking up the fruit peddler and her cart. Though comic moments, these interludes foreshadow Bloch's chapter, The Golem Runs Amok. One of Bloch's most seminal suggestions, however, appears in a 2-sentence paragraph at the end of The Golem is Given Work. After explaining how Joseph was put on night patrol in the ghetto, Bloch says, in this way the Golem became the terror of the enemy of the Jews. Some regarded him as a specter of Rabbi Lowe. The psychological implications of this last concept, the Golem as doppelganger, fascinated Meyrink, Levick, and Rothberg, and will be discussed in later chapters. The differences in the portraits of the rabbi in the two collections are small. Rosenberg characterizes him somewhat indirectly, mainly through his actions. Bloch uses more direct statement, more authorial comment. For example, at the end of the Purim Joy and Tragedy, Bloch says that his success in proving the innocence of Reb Aaron and his family attracted extraordinary attention in Prague and in the entire country, and increased the great respect in which Rabbi Loew was held. Rosenberg simply says that the city of Prague rejoiced and was glad. Bloch goes one step further, ending his epilogue to the audience with the Kaiser with a quotation from Proverbs 22:29: "Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings." Both Rosenberg and Bloch contribute their bit to hagiography, I'm not sure exactly how to say that, in their glorification of the great rabbi. In The Betrothal, Bloch says that Pearl's father, Reb Shmelki Reich, asked his future son-in-law to go to Lublin to study under Rabbi Solomon Luria, who at that time was the star of the greatest magnitude in the heavens of Jewish learning, the supreme head of the diaspora. In the same story, a Russian cavalry officer pays Pearl for some bread by throwing his extra saddle at her feet. This saddle, it turns out, has a fortune hidden in it. Reb Reich insists that the officer is actually the prophet Elijah, whose appearance attests to the greatness of his future son-in-law. Sometimes the differences in characterization of the rabbi are more subtle. And caught in his own net, Bloch, as does Rosenberg in his version, mentions the rabbi's custom of reading prayers from the book rather than reciting them from memory. But Bloch adds, he used to say that he could tell from the characters what was the mood of heaven, whether mercy or severity. If the latter, he understood how to temper it. The addition of this comment disrupts the narrative, but it enhances the characterization of Rabbi Loew as a Kabbalistic scholar and wonder rabbi capable of amazing feats. Only a few final miscellaneous differences between the Bloch and Rosenberg collections of Golem legends need to be pointed out. Although both men lace their stories with quotations from Jewish sources, Bloch is the more scholarly of the two, as he quotes from the Torah, other biblical sources, and the Talmud. Rosenberg's occasional quotations are undocumented, but Bloch usually informs the reader whether the passage just quoted is from, for example, Sanhedrin 58b or Barakoth 19b, see the Disputation, or he explains certain Jewish religious observances with supporting quotations from Exodus and Genesis, as in the making of the Golem, whereas Rosenberg will simply mention that a family held a Purim celebration. Bloch will supply loving details. In Purim, Joy and Tragedy, he writes, with great glee and spirit the company sang the beautiful melody Shoshanat's Yaakov in the birth of Yudl. He warmly describes the details of Rabbi Bezalel's Seder. Is a Seder, I believe. In various stories, Bloch alludes to the Sefer Yezerah and its Seraphim, whereas Rosenberg never mentions this classic of Jewish mysticism. In the Disputation, the scholarly Bloch explains that Christ's crucifixion was carried out by Romans. This is shown by the manner of execution, because crucifixion was a form not known to the Talmud and, what is more, was introduced by the Romans. After shortening Rosenberg's version of the parable, Rabbi Loew uses in answering the fifth question in debate with the 300 priests, Bloch adds 3 pages of commentary on the analysis of the Jewish position on the concept of the chosen people and the Jewish attitude toward non-Jews. Bloch's quotations range from Amos and Jeremiah to Maimonides. Rosenberg usually supplies only a translation of the Hebrew. Bloch supplies both the original and a translation, as in the case of the dream message from heaven, which provides a Rabbi Loew with the mystical formula for creating the Golem. That Rosenberg, however, is also well versed in Jewish lore can be seen in the dreadful tale about the deserted house near Prague, in which Rabbi Leva discovers that the courier's mysterious nighttime barking is caused by his blemished undergarment and phylacteries. I thought this was ending, but no. A little disappointed. I thought it was ending. For it is written that every Jew is accompanied by angels who guard him on every road, and the angels are created by his fulfilling the commandments of the phylacteries and the fringes. Bloch omits this explanation, but has Rabbi Lowe give the man a special amulet with the protective inscription, "But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog wet his tongue." Both writers are somewhat Victorian in their treatment of sex, but Rosenberg is more so. Bloch begins an attack on the Golem with an anecdote involving incest, insisting that fatalism, not the couple, is to blame. Rosenberg omits the story completely. In the wondrous tale that was widely known as The Sorrows of a Daughter, Rosenberg has Thaddeus shake the girl's hand. Bloch, in the romance of Rahl and Ladislaus, has him also lay his hand on her shoulder. As the Jewess, never named by Rosenberg, as he frequently prefers to treat the characters as stock types, becomes infatuated with the priest, Rosenberg primly records her behavior. She began secretly corresponding with the priest and would sometimes visit him alone late at night, until one night she didn't even come home to sleep. She vanished like a stone in water. Bloch much more effectively dramatizes for 2 pages the change that takes place in Rahel Berger. One hot afternoon in July after work, Rahel left the store and seized, with a wild impulse whose origin she could not explain and did not wish to fathom, she went out towards this promenade. Bloch explains, her soul became more and more lonely and more dismal. Well, she knew that the next few hours would open a deep chasm between her and her father's house, but she was already too tightly caught in the mesh of Thaddeus's net to tear herself free. She wished to remain, but her feet carried her along as if she had lost all control over them. That's pretty good. She knocks at the gate of the monastery. It had already been dark a long time. Rahel did not return to her home that night. Sometimes the differences between Rosenberg and Bloch involve their handling of a particular technical problem. For example, in the Disputation, where Rosenberg lists all 5 of the priest's main questions consecutively, giving the answers afterwards, Bloch takes them one at a time, with Rabbi Lowe's answers interspersed. The result is that Bloch's content is easier to concentrate on, though the differences are minimal. Another example is Rosenberg's taking one long paragraph to describe the making of the Golem, while Bloch intensifies the suspense by breaking the narration into 8 short dramatic paragraphs. This time, Bloch's technique is the more journalistic, but interest runs high in both cases. Of course, there are also many little differences in detail in the stories in both collections. For instance, in the making of the Golem, Bloch has Rabbi Lowe place a piece of parchment with the Shem in the prostrate Golem's mouth. This traditional detail is omitted by Rosenberg, as is the moment that the 3 men bow to all 4 directions of the compass. In the wondrous tale that was widely known as The Sorrows of a Daughter, Rosenberg has the young duke study conversion under the famous scholar Jacob Ginsburg. However, because Rabbi Ginsburg was so busy, he sent the young man to the yeshiva in Amsterdam. In Bloch's version, the romance of Rahl and Ladislaus, the rabbi's motivation is more complicated and historically more interesting. Worried about the danger to the Jews because of the conversion of a Christian to Judaism, he sends the young count to Amsterdam, where religious freedom prevailed and where no persecution was to be feared. In Bloch's version of the dropped Torah scroll, Rabbi Lowe makes the adulterer divorce his wife in keeping with Jewish law, a punishment which Rosenberg never mentions. And finally, as was mentioned above, Rosenberg gives 5350, 1590, as the year Rabbi Leva takes away the Golem's life. Bloch records it as 5353, 1593. Since one should always look for symbolic or mystical significance in the use of numbers in Jewish literature, especially when the author is familiar with Kabbalistic volumes like the Sefer Yetzirah, It seems more than accidental that Bloch chooses to have the Golem removed from Earth in his 13th year. Perhaps, as Robert Planck suggests in The Golem and the Robot, unaware of the Golem as conceived by Liebig and Rothberg, the Golem is destroyed before he reaches sexual maturity. There is, however, a more positive possibility. In Jewish tradition, the Jewish male enters adulthood in his 13th year. The Golem's work is done, and one hopes that a new era in the lives of the Jews may begin. Then again, the Golem also didn't start as a baby, which would be kind of cute if he did. Both Yudl, Rosenberg, and Chayim Bloch must figure prominently in any study of the legend of the Golem of Prague and his alleged creator, Rabbi Judah Loew. Whether Rosenberg was a literary forger and Bloch a plagiarist is, in the long run, of secondary importance. Both men gave shape, form, and continuity to legends that had a long oral tradition in Eastern Europe and had just begun to appear in print in the last half of the 19th century. 20th century lovers of short stories, plays, novels, poems, folklore, ballet, opera, and movies may not recognize the name of Rosenberg and Bloch as they read a story or watch a film about the Golem, but they owe a debt of gratitude to both writers for helping keep the legends alive and influencing new generations of writers and readers. All right, that's the end of chapter 3. The Golem as False Messiah, H. Liebig's verse drama. Next time. Goodbye, Brav. Goodbye.